In the previous video, we set up our Hello World application. What I want to do now is take you through setting up of the emulator so that when we get to the next video, we can actually run this application. So Android Studio should have automatically set up an emulator for you when you installed it, but I want to just go through and show you how to do that again anyway. So I'm going to click up in here and click into Tools and go into Android and go into AVD, Android Virtual Device Manager. Click on that. Now you can see that I've actually got a Nexus 5. Now this was created automatically when Android Studio installed. But what I want to do is I'm going to delete that and walk you through the process of creating that again. So I'm going to click on here and click on delete, just to delete it. And you can add and delete as often as you want without any ramifications. So if you've got everything deleted, you'll start off with a screen like this. So let's click on create a virtual device. Now I'm going to choose the Nexus 5 because that's the one that Google used, and it's a good one to use for testing purposes. So I'm just going to click on and leave that or select that as the default device and click on next. You can choose the version, the API. Now, if you've only installed Android Marshmallow, that's the only option you'll have on the screen. So choose that. That's the one that I would recommend you do anyway. Click on next. Next, you've got a few other options here. You can actually choose a few other things. And what I want to do is just point out what some of these are. Firstly, the AVD name, you can change that to something else if you want to. If you've got multiple images, the default name is probably fine. The image we already talked about, we're going to be using Marshmallow. We don't need to change that. You won't need to change up any of these startup size and orientation because generally you can swap them anyway. But if for some reason you wanted to, you could choose landscape instead of portrait. Now, if you've got Haxum installed and you've got an Intel CPU and you manage to get that installed, make sure that you do select use host GPU. You will actually need that to make sure it actually is faster. The other options we don't need to touch, but then also go into show advanced settings. Click on that. And once you do that, it actually frees up and gives you a few other options. I'll just make the screen a little bit bigger so we can see those. And we've got some other options here in terms of the amount of RAM to allocate. Now you notice that it's wanting to allocate 1,536 megabytes. That's 1.5 gig of RAM that it wants to allocate. So you may not have that amount of RAM depending on how much RAM you've got on your computer. So you might want to look at downsizing that. Alternatively, if you have difficulties, you might even want to go back and change the device so it's not a Nexus 5 and go back to like a Nexus 4 or something like that that's got smaller requirements. I'm going to leave that on the default because I've got plenty of RAM, but you do want to actually check that, particularly if you've started it and you've had some problems with it. This is the way to actually correct that and fix it. The other thing you might want to look at also is the scale. So click on scale. And this will be useful if you haven't got a huge screen. You can actually make that a little bit smaller to fit. Auto is generally a good option because Android Studio should configure that automatically so it'll work for your screen size. But it's something you'll need to look at doing if need be anyway to change if you're having some problems there. Now the other thing you can do is just scrolling down here. You take off use host GPU. That is useful if you haven't got an Intel CPU like I actually mentioned. And if that's the case, you'll have to get by. You won't be able to run Hax. If you can't run Haxum, you have to take that option off basically because the computer physically can't run it and you can't get that speed improvement that Intel have provided. Now there is a workaround for that. So if you're running, if you're not using an Intel CPU, there is an option called Genymotion in this course, and you can go through and download and install that and use that instead of using the Android virtual device. But if you've got Haxum working, your computer's working okay, I probably recommend that you use it because it's so nicely integrated into Android Studio. It works well. You will get a bit of a speed improvement either way with using Genymotion, but for me, I would say the Android virtual device is probably okay. So I've got an Intel CPU in this machine, so I'm going to click on use host GPU. So now when I click finish, the computer will go away and create that device for us. And you can see that it's actually created. I think the last thing I didn't show you was the CPU. And I can't do that here, but the CPU is significant because if I go back and open that, and the way to get access to that is to click on this little pencil. And because I've got this in full screen to try and make this fit better, not everything's coming up automatically for me, but there's an option in here for CPU, which we can change. And it's actually in here under allow, scroll over a little bit, Marshmallow Google APIs, Google Incorporated x86. Now, if you haven't got Haxum, then you need to have installed the other tool, and I'll go back into that screen and show you briefly, but you'll just select the relevant option here, and depending on what you've chosen, that will be the right version. If you're running Haxum, then you'll definitely want to choose the x86. because that's the speed, the one that's faster on your computer. But if you haven't got Hexam on your computer, you'll find that that won't work. So in fact, what you'll have to do is choose the other option, and I'll just show you how to actually bring up that option. So I'm going to cancel out of all of this, close this down. And that option was actually in when we configured under SDK Manager. So we go into SDK Tools, and just to make this a little bit bigger so we can see what we're doing here. Now you can see that I've actually got Intel x86 emulator installed. If I click on Launch Standalone SDK Manager, I can show you more precisely what I mean. So you can see that if I just turn everything off there, deselect all, API 23. So I've actually got the Google API, and also I've got the Google API system image installed. This is the x86 Atom image. So that's that x86 that I was talking about, and that's installed. If you haven't got a Hexam, weren't able to run Hexam, and it's not running, you'll in fact have to go back to the ARM EABI system image. So you'll select that one, you'll install that. Then once you do that, there'll be an option on the screen for you to go back, and you'll choose that as the option. So what I'll do is I'll actually install that now just to show you what I mean. So I'm going to click on that now, click on Install One Package, accept license. So again, this is just if you cannot run Hexam. Hexam's not working because you haven't got an Intel CPU, or perhaps you haven't got enough RAM to run Hexam, because Hexam really needs 8 GB or more of RAM. If you're in either of those two scenarios, then you'll need to install this ARM EABI V7A system image, which I know is quite a mouthful. Once you do that, you'll find once that's installed, there'll be other options that will appear in that screen where we're in the setting up the Android virtual device, and you'll be able to run it. So in that case, you'll find that it will be a lot slower than it would ordinarily have been with Hexam, and that's just one of those things, because the Intel, the manufacturers of the Intel CPU have created this Hexam tool as a speed up, and unfortunately the other CPU manufacturers haven't created that. So there's nothing Android can do. It's not really Android's fault. It's the fact that Intel have given us those tools for Intel CPUs. So we'll go ahead and do this. And again, just to be 100% clear, if you have got an Intel CPU and Hexam is running, you don't need to do this step. Okay, you can see that's now installed. If we have a look, we can see that says it's installed. So if I close this out now, if I go back to Android Studio, cancel out of that, and if I go back back into Android Virtual Device, AVD Manager, now I may have to close down and start up for the changes to take effect. But now if I go back and have a look here, yeah, we'll need to close that down. So I'm going to close that down. Close project. I'm just going to open it again. We should find, hopefully this time it will actually see that we've actually got this other CPU. No, it's not showing it. So what I'll do is I'll just go back and let's just create another one. So let's actually delete this again. Create a new one. I'm going to choose Nexus again. Next. I'm going to try closing down the entire Android Studio again and just start it up again, just so it can actually find that setting, because what we want it to do is see that we've installed that other image, and therefore we'll be able to run that. Go into application again. Will it be third time lucky? Time to start and initialize. Okay, we'll go to Tools, Android, AVD Manager. We'll create. We'll choose a Nexus 5. Next. This time it's working. Now this is what I was trying to show you before. So you can see it's got Marshmallow. It's now got another option, ARM EABI. So you would select that option if you can't get Intel Hexam to work. And in actual fact, it gives you a warning here. It actually says, consider using an x86 system image for better emulation performance. However, that will only work if you can get Hexam to work. So I hope that's made sense. If you haven't got Hexam on your computer working properly, you'll need to specify the ARM EABI, and you saw me setting that up. But if you have got Hexam working, you'll just click on Marshmallow, choosing x86, click on Next, and basically I'm going to choose all the defaults, but you'd go through and reconfigure them if necessary, as you saw me do previously or earlier in this video. So I'm going to click on Finish, and that will create the emulator for us. So either of those options, make sure that you've got your emulator configured and ready to go. And in the next video, we're actually going to run our application on this Android virtual device. So I'll see you in that video.